the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the USA Today NFL wire site covering the Arizona Cardinals. One of the many episodes we've done, I'm not numbering these, as I've mentioned in the last few, this is the opponent preview series for 2023, where I've got the Cardinals have 14 opponents, and so I will do 14 shows with the writers, editors, from our sister wire sites, and this one we get Kyle Madsen, one of my favorite guys on the NFL Wire. Been here since 2016 or earlier.
Yeah, I started contributing for Niners in 2015.
That's right.
And then when they
that's
launched
right, because Biederman ran it before you took over, but you've been here the entire time that I've been here. And well, this I think year 4 of doing these shows, so you've been coming on these for forever.
Yeah, man. It's my favorite annual Slack message. Yeah, man, I'm in. Let me know when.
And so we're going to talk 49ers. The Cardinals and the 49ers are going to be twice, like they play every single year. And so we'll look back at last season, the offseason, and what's looking ahead for what is a season of expectations for the Niners. And we burned some of the we burned some pre-show content on what was some really good stuff that I hope we can make it sound right.
I've got the takes loaded, man.
The 49ers, who were fantastic last year, went 13-4, made it to the NFC Championship game, and that was on their third-string quarterback. Trey Lance gets hurt early in the season. Jimmy Garoppolo, I believed this would happen. Like, I thought that with Trey Lance, they would not be as good as if they had Jimmy Garoppolo, but they needed to move on from Jimmy Garoppolo. He gets them to playing well. He gets hurt. Brock Purdy, Mr. Irrelevant, comes in. They go undefeated the rest of the year. He leads into the championship game, and then they have all the quarterback injuries, and you're left with Christian McCaffrey trying to throw some passes.
Right.
But
they didn't even do that. It was just one-armed Brock Purdy out there.
Right.
Like, oh my goodness, that was tough. That was tough to take in.
Johnson.
There's nothing worse than, and I don't mean to bring this up. It just so happens that this is a Cardinals podcast. Was it the 2014 NFC Championship game?
Right. It wasn't the championship game. It was the first round of the playoffs. We wasted a playoff appearance on Ryan Lindley. On what was probably the Cardinals' absolute best chance of winning the championship was that 2014 season. They were so good. Carson Palmer tears ACL. Drew Stanton gets hurt against the Rams, and so we roll for the rest of the season with Ryan Lindley, play an under 500 Panthers team in the first round of the playoffs, and produce the lowest offensive production in NFL playoff history with Ryan Lindley playing quarterback. Now, well, in fairness, that happened because there was like a minus 34-yard play the last play of scrimmage.
Right, but that game was over like early.
It was so devastatingly bad.
I was working in Arizona at the time, and a bunch of my coworkers are big Cardinals fans, and my buddy Dan at the next day at work was like, honestly, that's the bet. If you're gonna lose a playoff game, that's the way to do it. And that's how I felt about the Niners losing to the Eagles last year.
Like you go down with all the quarterback injuries.
Like, Josh Johnson wasn't beating the Eagles, but when Johnson went down with the concussion, it was really clear that Purdy's arm didn't work. It was just, okay, let's do the last 36 minutes of this game or whatever it was. Let's get this over with. Ugh.
Jeez.
Yuck.
That said, I would say it would be fair to say that they far exceeded any expectations that anyone had for that team, right?
Yeah. Given the way the season went, yes. But I definitely think going into the year, if you had just told me, hey, they went 13-4, I wouldn't have been floored. The thought in my head would have been, oh, Trey Lance figured it out quick.
Yeah.
Or they lost 2 to start and he was terrible and Garoppolo came in and they went 13-2 the rest of the way. That would have, Brock Purdy would have never entered my head. Right. And if you had said, hey, Brock Purdy's going to come in the first drive or after the first drive in week 13, I would have thought season over. And I thought
We're drafting a new quarterback.
Right. I thought that at the time. I was doing post game on the radio for Niner games at the station I was at. And I said when Garoppolo got hurt and they showed him getting carted off, I was like, that sucks. Their season's over in week 13. I thought it was done. And Brock Purdy, it turns out, can play a little bit, which is a stunner to me. I had no faith in him. But yeah, man. I think so given how the season went, yeah, they dramatically exceeded whatever I thought they were going to do.
So tell me what you thought. So I wonder about whether Purdy can, if he, because they have such a talented roster, he doesn't need to be great. He doesn't. Mm-hmm. And what he was last year was competent and smart, which is really when I talked to you last year, I'm like, this is look at this team. They have a great offensive. They have one of the best offensive tackles. You've got a great wide receiver group. You've got the best tight end, one of the best tight ends in the league. Mm-hmm. You now add Christian McCaffrey, arguably the best running back we've seen in a long time, in the best scheme running offense in the NFL. You just need your quarterback not to mess things up. Tell me, like what you were telling before the show, your thoughts on Purdy and Garoppolo.
So I kind of feel like Purdy, we'll start there. He was last year, like I said, he exceeded any expectation I had for him. And he was really good in little ways that Garoppolo was terrible. And I went and I looked at the numbers. He pushes it down the field a little bit more often, and I'll get to that in a second. But under pressure, Garoppolo was a disaster. When the pocket collapsed, Jimmy Garoppolo was going to take a sack or turn it over. That was how it felt. Whereas with Purdy, when the pocket collapsed, there were you can quibble with some of the ways he escaped the pocket and whether he did it too early. I'll do that. But there were so many plays where the pocket breaks down and he steps up through it and makes a play, or rolls out to his right and makes a play. There were 3, 4, 5 plays last year where Jimmy Garoppolo might take a sack or turn the ball over, and Brock Purdy turns it into a touchdown. And that little change is just so monumental on an offense like you just described with Christian McCaffrey and with George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel. They have a quarterback now that have any like physical trait that wows you? No, but he can extend the amount of opportunities that the 49ers have to get the ball to those playmakers. And that is key number one. After that, it's don't turn it over. And there's two areas though that I mentioned. He pushes the ball down the field a little more often than Garoppolo did. He threw it deep more often, and he threw it into the intermediate area about the same amount. This is my favorite stat. He completed 80% of his throws 10 to 19 yards beyond the line of scrimmage. 80%. The next highest in the league was Deshaun Watson at 68. The difference between 1 and 2, Brock Purdy and Deshaun Watson, was the same as the distance between Deshaun Watson and number 30.
Well, and I know a lot. Like Shanahan is a genius on scheming guys open, and you'd have wide open guys that Garoppolo would barely complete.
Right. Yeah, he missed so many open guys, or there would be a shot open deeper down the field, and he would take the shorter throw. There's those little things. Do I think Brock Purdy is way better than Jimmy Garoppolo? No, because he might regress. Those intermediate throws, if he drops down to 61, 62%, and he had a couple of interceptions. One was dropped, one was called back. The dropped one against Seattle, and then there was one that was called back against Tampa. Those 2 interceptions could pretty dramatically change the way we view Brock Purdy. So I think he might see his interceptions uptick a little bit, and then his completion rate in the middle of the field or in that intermediate area come down some, and maybe he comes down to earth a little bit. But I do think just that escapability and that awareness when the play falls apart, and he can run the offense, but when he has to make a second reaction play or extend the play, he's really good at that. And I think that's where you kind of see the Niners offense take a leap.
Anything last season that would have been viewed, aside from the injury situation, but anything that happened in the season that was viewed as disappointing, because the defense was fantastic. You got you played well offensively. You won a ton of games, but was there anything that underperformed?
Outside of Trey Lance, like that was not awesome.
That was.
I'm also just real quick on that. I'm not out on Trey Lance. I think Trey Lance is going to wind up going somewhere, and I think could be a really, really good player. He just needs to play, and I think
he needed that last year, and then he breaks his leg, and
and it was season over. So I think his time with the Niners is done, given how things are kind of going now. But that's a separate thing. So the Lance injury was definitely disappointing. Like Javon Kinlaw, 2020 first round pick, had a tough year.
Again.
Drake Jackson, their second round pick last year, wound up a healthy scratch in like 5 of their last 6 games, including the playoffs. That was not great. Elijah Mitchell, really good running back. Dealt with injuries again. He's only played 16 games in his first 2 years. That's talented player, but can't stay on the field.
Y'all are used to that.
Yeah, that's just kind of, and then they made up for it by trading for Christian McCaffrey. So no, I think they met or exceeded expectations at like every position I had question marks about. They wound up being really, really good.
Coming up next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, Best Hour of Cardinals talk. Let's move to the offseason, free agency, and the draft. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the Best Hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Free agency. The 49ers made one of the big moves early, adding Javon Hargrave to that defensive line, which seems unfair. I'll admit it. That seems unfair to put Hargrave in a defense in the interior where you already have Eric Armstead and you already have Nick Bosa. That's not fair. You're not playing by the rules.
Sure.
Adding Sam Darnold is a game changer, right?
Totally. Yeah. Sam Darnold, the MVP, future MVP. The amount of people that I've seen, and Brooke, the Niners can add Javon Hargrave if the Eagles are going to do what the Eagles have been doing.
That's true.
So that's just a whole, that's they have to do that to compete in the NFC. But the amount of love for Sam Darnold this offseason has been insane.
I love him as a backup quarterback. I do. I love him. He's
no, totally as a backup quarterback. But you got Mike Martz out here like, oh, they're going to win the Super Bowl because Sam Darnold is going to be the starter. And you've got another guy from CBS like Adam Shine. Is that his name?
Yeah.
Was like, Sam Darnold, love him as an MVP bet. Like, what are we doing here?
No. Like, he's like, his ceiling is super high, but the problem is turnovers, in which he will. Yes. Yeah. It's worse than Jimmy Garoppolo.
Right. When the lights come on, it's the I'm seeing ghosts thing. I know that was like a meme, but that's just that's a good encapsulation of, and he's super talented. And if he has to come in, I think the Niners could win a couple games, but I would also not love their chances to win a playoff game if Sam Darnold's playing. Like that's just, and I think the days of Kyle Shanahan takes average quarterbacks and turns them great, I think that got overblown because what Kyle Shanahan was doing with Matt Schaub in Houston was just so new. And what Kyle Shanahan did with Matt Ryan in 2016 was just so new that the league didn't know how to defend it.
But then he did it with Brock Purdy.
Yeah, but I think there's, like I said, I think there's something there with Purdy where he's not like just a bad quarterback. He does some stuff outside of structure that helps. And they're loaded offensively. It's not the quarterback that's carrying this offense right now. It's George Kittle. It's Christian McCaffrey. It's Deebo Samuel. It's Brandon Ayuk. So I think that this idea that Kyle Shanahan can take a guy like Sam Darnold and just turn him into 2016 Matt Ryan I think those days are gone because everybody runs some version of the Kyle Shanahan system now.
Right.
And defenses know how to defend it or learning better how to defend it. So that's just Sam Darnold. Yeah, fine. Love him as a backup, but come on.
He's not like, I don't mind, but geez. Any other notable additions or subtractions in free agency?
I should know the answer to this. Yeah, they lost their starting right tackle, Mike McGlinchey.
That's right. But he's a good. They paid him too much in Denver. Is what you said, right?
Denver cashed him out. That was crazy. But he's a good player. He was one of those players that drew the ire of 49er fans because you wouldn't notice him. Oh, he's a very good run blocker. You wouldn't notice him in the passing game, but there was maybe 1 or 2 reps a game where he would just be a traffic cone. And those would get clipped. And it's like, Mike McGlinchey is the worst tackle in the league. No, he's not. He's a good player. And that is going to be, I don't think they're going to have a super easy time replacing him. So that's a pretty significant loss. I mean, they lost Azeez Al-Shire, their third linebacker, but that position's not on the field that much.
And you already have Fred Warner and Drake Greenlaw, so it's not like.
Yeah, that's not a huge thing. I'm super interested to see their first pick this year was number 87 in the third round. And it's a kid named Jair Brown from Penn State. And I don't know if he's going to start because they re-signed Tayshaun Gibson, who was good for them last year. He turns 33 in August. So I think he's going to be their starter, but I'm really interested to see how Jair Brown fits into the defense this year, whether it's pushing for that starting job or if Steve Wilkes, their new defensive coordinator, another addition, is going to deploy like a 3 safety look here and there with Brown, who's supposed to be a really versatile player. And that's my big question for the Niners this year.
I can tell you from the Steve Wilkes perspective, he will do that if they've got the talent, because he basically had Budda Baker playing linebacker. He had him playing linebacker and slot in 2018 when he was head coach here. Very interesting. What are your thoughts on Steve Wilkes as a defensive coordinator?
He was the guy I wanted. I'm really high on Steve Wilkes. I think he's a very good coach. I think the 49ers have a good enough foundation that if you can bring in a coach like him who has so much experience, especially with secondary guys, the Niners front seven is so good. If you have a defensive coordinator that can just push the right buttons and have things figured out in the back end, they should be fine. But I mean, I had questions about DeMeco Ryans after Robert Saleh left. I'm going to have questions about Steve Wilkes now that DeMeco Ryans is left. But he was
for sure. Wilkes looked at that job and said, I want that because everyone else gets a head coaching job, and he felt he should get a head coaching job again. Yeah. But I will say this, defensive coordinator in Cleveland, he was like head coach Cardinals, bad. Defensive coordinator Cleveland, bad. Defensive coordinator at Missouri, bad. It turned around last year. It really, everything about Steve Wilkes turned around last year when he got the interim job.
Yeah. And that was why, because that's the thing. If you go look at the DVOA numbers and stuff, it's not great. But I think this defense is talented enough, and
how can you mess up? How can you mess up Nick Bosa, Javon Hargrave, Fred Warner, Drake Greenlaw, and then you've got just, even if you're not elite in the secondary, you are capable in the secondary. And Charvarius Ward's a very good player. You got Tayshaun Gibson, who's good. Hufanga was fantastic set last season. Mm-hmm. Yeah, like it's hard to probably you or I could scheme a defense with that talent that could.
Honestly, we had on my podcast, Candlestick Chronicles, we had Miles Hartsfield, who was with Steve Wilkes he's been in Carolina his whole career, but he was with Steve Wilkes in Carolina last year, and then signed with the Niners this year on a 1-year deal. And he talked about Steve Wilkes as a coach with just, so much adoration for him and what he means to the players and how much players like him and respond to him. That to me is a bigger deal than the schematic stuff when the defense is as talented. But
they talk about him the same way that players talked about Ryans, right? That's because we got that sort of vibe about DeMeco Ryans as well. Yeah.
Players is a player's coach for sure. But if you told me that the Niners defense fell off a little bit this year, though, it wouldn't. I don't think it would necessarily shock me because, like you said, the history of Steve Wilkes as a defensive coordinator has not been awesome.
No, it hasn't. The draft, you already mentioned Brown. Would you say probably the draft pick who will have the largest impact on this season would be the kicker they got in Jake Moody, who is really, really good?
Yeah. Legitimately, yes. He's the rookie who's going to play the most, I think. And they picked him 99. He better be Justin Tucker. Like, he can't just be, he's pretty good. And Kyle Shanahan's a very conservative coach. I know he's on the cutting edge of offensive football and he's a genius and da-da-da-da. Like, I fine, whatever. I don't love the way he goes about his fourth down calls. I don't love the way he so often elects to kick field goals over going for it. And I think that there's a conservative way that he manages the game that he's been able to, because Robbie Gould has been, for the most part, pretty good during his time in San Francisco. But this is the first time they've had to integrate a new kicker, and they believe in Jake Moody. I mean, they believe he's going to be a star. So that's great, but the Niners are going to lean on him a lot. So he better be good right away.
The list of your long list of draft picks goes, you already mentioned Brown and Moody, Cameron Latu, tight end Alabama, Darrell Luter Jr., South Alabama cornerback, a guy I low-key liked, Robert Beal Jr., edge out of Georgia, D. Winters, TCU linebacker, Braden Willis, Oklahoma tight end, Ronnie Bell, Michigan wide receiver, and Jalen Graham, linebacker, Purdue. Who of those guys will do anything this year, and who has a future?
I think one of Latu and Willis are gonna rise in a receiving role next to George Kittle, because the Niners have never really had that. In fact, I'm writing a piece today about their lack of receiving production from the backup tight end spot over the last 6 years. So I think one of them is going to rise. I don't know exactly which one, because you have a guy like Willis who's been catching passes, and he caught passes his entire career at Oklahoma. But then you got a guy like Latu, who's a converted defensive end, who just kind of came into a pass catching role in the last couple of years with Alabama. So I'm fascinated to see that. I don't know why, but something sticks out to me with Robert Beal. And he was not super productive at Georgia, but dude, he's like 6'3", 6'4", like 255. He's got super long arms. He ran like a 4.4. And he can fly. He's really explosive. He's big. And I like the idea of putting him on the Niners defensive line with that coaching staff and seeing if he can develop into something. So that's the guy I've really circled that I'm watching in camp.
All right. Coming up next on the Rise of C-Red podcast, special Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's move to the 2023 season, a season with high expectations. Can they match them? That's coming next on Rise of C-Red. We're back on the Rise of C-Red podcast, special Cardinals Talk on the Web. The 49ers in 2023, one of the absolute favorites to not only win the NFC, but win the Super Bowl. And obviously, you've got the Chiefs at the top for favorites for the Super Bowl. But the 49ers are right there, and with the Eagles are basically co-favorites to take the NFC. What is that reasonable? Are those reasonable expectations for a team that's going to lean on Brock Purdy as a quarterback moving forward, coming off of elbow surgery, and probably going to be ready for Week 1?
It has to be the expectation. When your roster is built the way it's built, you can't go into a year being happy with, if you can win a playoff game, that'd be nice. Like that's not where this team is at all. So I think the expectation has to be there. The 49ers believe fervently in Brock Purdy. So yeah, he went 5-0 as a starter last year in the regular season, and then won 2 playoff games. So if they're going to roll with him as the unquestioned starter, then yeah, the expectation is they're going to win a lot of games and make a push for a Lombardi trophy. That's just where this team is and needs to be with the amount of talent that's on it.
So ceiling is obviously Super Bowl, not just Super Bowl rings in the famous words of Bruce Arians. Not just Super Bowl rings, but reasonable expectations would be not necessarily winning the championship, but another deep playoff run would be reasonable to do, right?
Yeah, I think so. But if they lose in a NFC championship game for the third time in 3 years, at some point, fingers are going to start getting pointed.
Yeah.
I don't know. It kind of depends on how things shake out, but it would be fine. And it would be hard to, it's not like fire everybody, organizational turmoil kind of thing. But man, losing a third NFC title game in 3 years, like that's tough to swallow. I think they got to get over the hump.
But at the same time, you're like, that's 3 NFC title games in a row. that's really good. I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's good. It's not quite good enough because you always want to see improvement.
Yeah, and I imagine if they get to the NFC title game and lose, the way it goes down in my head is, they just weren't good enough at quarterback again.
Yeah.
If you go look, our buddy Doug Farrar, the managing editor at Touchdown Wire, if you go look at his power rankings, the Niners are 5. 1 is the Chiefs, and it's like Patrick Mahomes. 2 is the Eagles, and it's like Jalen Hurts, possible MVP. 3, the Bengals. Hey, Joe Burrow. If you want a guy leading your team, it's Joe Burrow. 4, Josh Allen and the Bills. And then 5, it's like the Niners are good.
We don't know about Purdy, who's ranked number 17 in the Touchdown Wire quarterback rankings.
Right. He's an unknown with an injured elbow. Like, cool, man. Like, so if they fall short again, like I was watching the Super Bowl last year, and for me, as good as Purdy was, it's like, man, it's really hard to imagine him going blow for blow with Patrick Mahomes or Jalen Hurts or Joe Burrow or Josh Allen.
Because Philly's defense was loaded. They were loaded on offense too, and they still faltered to the Chiefs.
Yeah. So, that's kind of where I've got them. They're good. They should be there, but I could also see a scenario where they lose in the NFC title game and we're sitting here next offseason going, man, they need to do something at quarterback.
Yeah, totally. Now, what do you think their reasonable floor is? We're not talking about major injury to Nick Bosa, or even but honestly, this is the situation they're in. So if Purdy gets hurt and it's Sam Darnold, if Darnold can minimize his erratic play, they're still kind of in the same situation, right?
A little bit.
Right. It kind of feels that way. That the 49ers have almost quarterback-proofed their team. All they need is mistake-free, competent play.
Right.
That's the problem. Garoppolo made too many mistakes.
Yep.
Darnold is very mistake-prone.
Yeah.
But what's the low end of what you think? Like, if it's a disappointing year, worst-case scenario, but not injury-wise, what do you see this team achieving?
Like, maybe this is too optimistic. Everybody's optimistic this time of year. Maybe it's too optimistic. But like 9 or 10 wins.
Yeah.
It's just really hard. They're just so talented. It's so hard to imagine.
They're so much more talented than the rest of the freaking division.
Yeah, and it's hard to imagine them going like 3-3 in the division. Like that's tough to get my head around. But they also have like a gauntlet of a schedule.
Yeah.
Where they have like the Bengals and then their bye week, and then it's like Jacksonville, and it's a bunch of teams that are made the playoffs and are expected to make the playoffs again. But it's easy to see them like going on the road to Jacksonville and stumbling and losing that game. They have a home Sunday night game against the Cowboys. It's easy. They didn't kick the Cowboys' rear ends in the playoffs by any means. Dallas took it to them for a lot of that game. It's easy to see them dropping one like that. There's just so many landmines on their schedule that just penciling them in like, oh yeah, they're going to win 12 or 13 games. I can't do that.
It is hard. It's hard to replicate that year to year. You can be a better team and not win as many games. That's one of the weird things about the NFL.
They opened this year in Pittsburgh. And that's not an easy game.
No, they should win it, but it's a home betting perspective. Home openers, I always give extra juice to the home team, no matter what.
Yeah, 1,000%, and that's a good, well-coached defense that has a bunch of tape now on Brock Purdy, and Brock Purdy playing his first game since getting his elbow obliterated in the NFC Championship game. Like that's a huge question mark. Yeah. And then it's like Rams on the road. Okay, call that a W. But then Giants Thursday night at home, and the Giants I think play Arizona the week before, so I'm imagining they'll stay on the West Coast. Like that's not a layup. Could they get in a rock fight with the Giants? Like, yeah, 100%.
Hey, but at least you got the Cardinals in week 4.
I wasn't going to
But let's be honest. The 49ers view obviously it's a division game, but the 49ers view the Cardinals and the roster, especially fans, those are two going to win games, right?
Yeah, yes. Like logically, yeah, for sure. When do you think Kyler's going to be back?
I think he'll be back in week 6.
Okay, so the missing the first game, like that's the big wild card to me. Kyler's just such a pain, man, that if he's playing, I'm never chiseling in a W.
I think he'll play. I'm pretty sure, and he should be, back and comfortable by the time they play the second time.
Was that week 15?
Oh,
16?
yeah, definitely. Okay, that's right. That's the Rams we wrap up early, and we play the 49ers in week 15, and then the Cardinals play the Seahawks in week 18. So, yeah. I see that game being, I still pencil in both games as not like no chance games, but that second one at home, there's a fighting chance at least, assuming based on my expectations that Kyler's back and healthy.
That second one at home, here's what the Niners have leading into that game. Seahawks Thursday night at Seattle on Thanksgiving. The next Sunday, they travel to the Eagles. Then they come back home to play the Seahawks, and then they travel to Arizona.
Oh, my gosh.
Like, if they go
49ers, there's so that one metric.
See them.
The metric where the 49ers were given the least favors this year on their schedule.
Yeah, their schedule is really tough. But it's so easy to see them going into a division game. Kyler's back. He's comfortable. Niners coming off a really brutal 3-game stretch. They toss their helmets on the field and they lose 24-18. Like that's so easy to picture. So, and that's just that is more like, I know the Cardinals are rebuilding and they, new front office and new coaching staff. I totally get that. But that is like all Kyler. I have so much like appropriate fear of Kyler Murray.
Well, Zoom's going to cut us off here in a couple minutes, so we don't want that to happen before we say goodbye. Thank you so much for your time, like you do every year.
Yeah, of course.
And that's Kyle Madsen. You can find him naturally on NinersWire.com. You can catch him on the Candlestick Chronicles podcast with Chris Biederman, who was a former Niners Wire guy. And on social media, he not only on Twitter now, you can find him for good football takes, but he's pretty funny too, even though he doesn't like to admit it.
I try to be. As long as anybody else thinks I'm funny, then that's great.
Well, thank you, Kyle. That'll wrap up this edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. We will be back for another show in the next, probably tomorrow, with how this is going. Probably tomorrow I'll post the next show. Thanks for listening as always.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up C-Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up, Sea Red.